AMD just announced
the all-new Ryzen 7040 series.
Whoa. Amazing.
And with that, headlines are flying with everybody saying that this is the M1 Pro killer. Now, with that said, AMD made headlines like this chip being 30% faster than the M1 Pro while having up to 30 hours of battery life, making it seem like this is by far a shockingly good, amazing chip. Now, when we take a deeper, closer look, there are some weird things. For example, benchmarks that could be cherry-picked, I'll get into that, and battery life statements that also don't make sense, and some other comparisons which didn't go against the M1 Pro. Now, along with those things, I'm also gonna cover the M2 Pro, which we know is going to be coming out very soon, and how this AMD 7940HS will compare with the M2 Pro. Now, before we jump in, I was at CES. It was an awesome show. I met a lot of fans there, which was cool, but I actually went to the AMD booth, checked out a bunch of their laptops. I saw the laptops with this new chip, but unfortunately, I was not allowed to test it out and get those numbers for myself other than what they picked to show off on stage. So I want to let you know that we will be testing out these laptops as soon as they're available, doing real world benchmarks and comparisons. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button below so you guys don't miss out on those. Now, this new high-end mobile chip from AMD is the first one that is using the so-called 4nm process from TSMC, which technically is built on 5nm, but that might be a separate video to get into. They said it has over 25 billion transistors. That's close to double compared to their 6000 series. And of course, going down to 4nm, that helps with extra transistors. But taking a look at the M1 Pro, that actually has 33.7 billion transistors. The 7940HS is an 8-core CPU, and compared to the M1 Pro, that is actually a 10-core, which we'll also talk about, this is important, but we have a binned 8-core version as well. This thing can go all the way up to 5.2 gigahertz in its turbo boost mode, which of course it will not stay there unless you have proper cooling and low enough temperatures, compared to the M1 Pro at 3.5 gigahertz, which that actually clocks down to about 3.2 if you're running it for a long time across all of the threads. And with that, one of the things that AMD really focused on is the Neural Engine AI processing. This is the first AMD chip that has a dedicated neural engine, and it can actually support 4 streams at one time, 4 AI streams with up to 12 trillion operations per second. The M1 Pro, on the other hand, can only do 11 trillion operations per second, so it is slower, but Apple's M2 chip actually does 15.8 trillion operations per second. And of course, we know that the M2 Pros and Maxes are going to come out, and those are going to have improved performance over the M1 Pros. Now, I'm really glad that AMD is putting a neural engine, what they're calling Ryzen AI, into these new chips. So many applications now are using neural engine stuff. For example, they showed off video processing and photo processing. And not only is it useful for those kind of things, and the same thing that Apple does with their photo and video, but also for applications like photo editing, where Lightroom can find skies in the background. Also things like video editing in DaVinci Resolve, and so much more. Now, on stage, they not only compared to Apple's processors, but also Intel's. And it was interesting that they said their x86 competitor and not Intel specifically. And with that, with Intel, they also compared to the 12th gen, not the newly released 13th gen. And of course, Intel doesn't have any built into those chips, but to be fair, with the neural engine comparison, they were going against the M2, which technically has more operations per second, but AMD still said that it's 20% better. Now, the M1 and the M1 Pro and Max, they have the same neural engine. The M2 is improved, which also means that the M2 Pro might use the same exact neural engine. We don't know if it's going to be upgraded, and if it isn't, that means AMD is actually ahead, which is a great thing. I love competition to push everybody forward, and Apple definitely needs it. Now, before I get back to the CPU performance comparisons, talking about cherry-picked numbers as well as battery life, I want to touch on graphics because AMD barely spent any time on this. They did show off that their new chip has 20% better graphics performance than Intel's 12th gen lineup. But interestingly, on that chart, for the M1 Pro, it just said NA, which is really weird because there are games that run well on all the systems, as well as benchmarks and different video and rendering that can use graphics, but it simply was not there. Now, if we take a closer look, they said 20% better than the 1280p. Now, we have compared a lot of Windows laptops that compare to the M1 Pro and even just the M1 and M2 chip. And when we take a look at raw graphics performance, the Intel 1280p, which their chip beats by 20%, has 2.2 teraflops of raw graphics performance. Now, just the M1 gets 2.6 teraflops. That is right in line where their new 7940HS should come in terms of graphics performance. And the M1 came out about, what, 2.5 years ago? And the M2 chip, not the M1 Pro, that has 3.6 teraflops of performance, and the M1 Pro has 5.3 teraflops of performance there compared to roughly 2.6 for their new processor. So now we know why they did not show that off on screen at the event. Now, I have to be fair with Apple. Of course, Apple cherry picks their numbers as well. They want to present things as best as possible, and then the truth isn't always completely lined up. Like, for example, the M1 Max, where they said that it could beat out the best NVIDIA chip, but they didn't show off the full wattage of that chip. Now, AMD said that laptops with the chip will be launching in March, and in 2023, there'll be over 250 laptops that have this lineup of chips available, and we'll be getting these as soon as possible. So if you guys want real-world performance tests against this 7940HS, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button below. Now, going back to the performance with the CPU, which is what they focused on. They said that it's 30% more powerful than the M1 Pro. Now, initially when I looked at it, I'm like, this is amazing, 4 nanometer, it's great, and it still is really good, but taking a little closer look, there's a couple things that didn't make sense. Now, their first number was from Cinebench. Now, the first kind of weird thing is that they didn't say if they are comparing to the full M1 Pro chip that is 10 cores or the bin version that is an 8-core chip. They're just showing the performance gains. Now, since their chip is an 8-core setup, I would think if they want to make the numbers look bigger, they could just use that base model 14-inch for their numbers, but we're not sure yet. And with that, once again, they're comparing to Intel 12th gen, not the 13th series, and I couldn't find the numbers for the 13th yet, but comparing a higher end chip that was a replacement for the 12700, Intel has about an 18% gain with their new chips, meaning that even Intel's latest chips that came out are actually going to be very close or closer to this new AMD compared to the 8th series. Now, the second part they showed off was the BMW Blender render here, and on screen you could see that the 7940HS is going super quick, smoking the M1 Pro and the i7 chip, and they had us wait and wait until it was done just to make that point. And this is where they get the 30% faster than the M1 Pro using Blender. Now, one weird thing is that in Blender, even with Mac not being fully developed for Blender ARM and Metal, the Metal performance is way faster using graphics than CPU, like we showed off in our initial videos when that beta just came out, and it's getting even better. So I wonder why they didn't use graphics rendering instead of CPU when everybody would, because it's much faster. And then of course, we have the wattage that is required for this chip, along with the battery life. Now, on stage, they showed between 15 to 45 watts. Now, it makes it seem that this chip could be clocked down very low, but if we take a closer look, this new high-end chip, it's actually a 35 to 45 watt chip. The 15 is if you're using other slower, lower end chips. So in order to get this 30% better CPU performance, you need to have 45 watts of power because they're using all of it that they can, whereas the M1 Pro non-binned uses 30 watts and the bin version uses 22. So even if they are comparing to the unbinned 10-core M1 Pro, that means they need 50% more power in order to achieve 30% more performance, and that is with the M1 Pro. Now we know that the M2 Pro is going to be coming out, and there's a good chance that it won't be 3 nanometer, but with 4 nanometer being launched and Apple's laptops coming out at a similar time, a lot of people are saying that it makes absolute sense for the M2 Pro to be ran on a 4 nanometer enhanced node as well. So that would mean that the M2 Pro that this laptop would actually compete with, not the chip that came out a year and a half before that the AMD is comparing to, well, that's gonna be a much more even playing field. And this 4 nanometer process uses 22% less power than the Apple's M2 chip that came out that did see 13% improvement over M1, but required 33% more power. So the playing field will be leveled once the M2 is out, and with that, that chip is also going to perform a lot better as well. So that's going to be very interesting to compare. Now, as you guys know, raw performance is only one factor that could be accounted. It's easy to advertise that off, but actual performance in real world tests could be much different. For example, with the M2 chip, we compared it to AMD's best at that time, and even with the M2 MacBook Air that is fanless, the AMD chip smoked it when it was plugged in Cinebench. But when it came down to real world performance in Lightroom, which uses the CPU, the fanless MacBook Air absolutely destroyed it, and that is because of the unified memory architecture, the RAM being right there, and the whole system running much faster. Now, along with that, we have things like video editing and ProRes. In regular video editing, the M2 Air smoked it already, even though it has much weaker CPU and graphics, but with ProRes, it was an absolute slaughter, having those dedicated encoders built into the M2, which of course the M1 Pro and M2 Pro chips will also have. And lastly, we have to talk about the 30 hours of battery life, which sounds groundbreaking and shocking paired to 4 nanometers, and people are already getting really hyped up for this. But the reality is these numbers are often very skewed, like we've seen many times over with Windows laptops saying 20 hours, 28 hours, but in reality it's half of what Apple Silicon gets. Now, of course, we are fans, but we show these off and test them on screen running tests in real world performance and usage. Now here we have a commenter saying 30 hours battery life, that is insane, but then somebody else commenting that previously they also had high claims, but the brightness of laptops were cut down so much it wasn't even usable, and the whole test was not compliant. Now, of course, 4 nanometer, or the version of that, is 22% more power efficient, but that does not mean the laptops will have triple the battery life. So I'm pretty sure those claims are on the 15 watt models with brightness shut down very low in very easy tests, and then having Windows in battery saver mode where it's kind of unusable and it slows down so much like we've seen in the past. Whereas with the M2 chips, the efficiency cores are so good that even when I made my video on low power mode, the wattage went down to 1 to 2 watts, but it still outperformed many Windows laptops and it was completely usable. So I think that number is just very exaggerated. I hope it is near that good, but we will find out in our upcoming hands-on real-world comparisons how that battery life actually does. Maybe we'll even do a dedicated video on that. You guys let us know if you want to watch it. Now, while you're waiting, if you want to pick up an M2 MacBook Air, which we absolutely love, or a 14-inch with the M1 Pro, check out the YouTube shopping feature. You guys can go and check it out there. And make sure you guys are subscribed above to see those hands-on comparisons. It's been Max. Check out one of those videos over there, and we'll see you in the next one.